Russia now has an armed force 3 times the size of what the United States does. NATO is militarily impotent. They have no industrial base to produce what they need to stay in the fight. Russia's built to defend itself, and the West is not. Europe is in the process of dying. They are facing extinction. This attack on Iran is all about destabilizing that region and bringing it under the control of the West so that they can go after Russia and China. The West is in the business of deceiving itself about its capabilities. What's happening with Russia and China in their leadership roles in BRICS is the creation of a new financial system. That's what's at play here. The end of the United States financial empire, that's on the horizon.
World War III is already happening.
This is a house of cards, and it is in the process of collapsing right now.
You're going to see an economic crash, the likes of which we've never seen.
Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. Today on the channel, we are joined by Larry Johnson, a former CIA analyst and veteran of the U.S. State Department's Office of Counterterrorism. With decades of experience in intelligence, national security, and geopolitical analysis, he brings a deeper insider perspective on how power really works behind the scenes. So, Larry, as I was stating before we started here today, it appears as though things are really taking a turn for the worse. The Trump and Putin bromance has seemingly all but subsided. That whole veneer of political niceties is now dissipating, it seems. And now we're in a whole another realm of the beginning, it seems, of a confrontation. And it appears as though these guys are now at loggerheads. Let's maybe start with the Ukraine-Russia situation.
Sure.
Because yesterday, I think Russia had fired 780 drones at Ukraine. That was 3 times the amount of drones that had ever been fired under Biden. Now, I'm no fan of Biden, but I have to wonder, how come this war wasn't resolved in 24 hours? And what do you really think the end game is going to be here? How does this all end with Ukraine and the Trump administration and Russia?
Well, let's start. On Sunday, actually, Russia fired over 500 drones and missiles. And the next day, over another 500. And then yesterday, 300. So that's 1,300 in 3 days. In this context, Trump is reportedly going to send some more Patriot missiles to Ukraine. Well, each Patriot battery launcher, if they have an incoming drone or missile, they'll fire 2 Patriot missiles at it. So just let's do the math. So let's say that they had enough Patriot batteries to fire missiles at every one of those 1,300 drones and missiles that Russia fired. That'd be 2,600. Well, Lockheed Martin, who makes the Patriot missile, makes only 550 a year. So right off the bat, in one day, in 3 days, you fire off 5 years worth of missiles.
Yeah.
So this is...
Are they using anti-aircraft, anti-artillery for that as well?
No. They really don't have an answer for it. Russia, by contrast, has a robust missile force. They use a variety of systems: the S-300s, S-400s, S-500s, Pantsir. So they've got some answers. But what's going on right now with this entire special military operation, and I emphasize it is a special military operation, not a war. If it was a war, Russia would be fully mobilized. They would be rationing fuel, rationing food. They would be the population would be mobile. Everything would be oriented into a military campaign. That's not the case. If you go to Russia today, I've been 5 times in the last since December 2023 to both St. Petersburg and Moscow. You wouldn't know a war was going on. based on, normal life. People go into restaurants, stores are filled, the tourist sites are, very active. There's no outward symbol that there's a war. The so-called tensions between Putin and Trump. Trump's crazy. He's erratic. There's something off with this guy. Because he keeps saying the most bizarre things, whereas the Russians have made it very clear. Look, we got to deal with the fundamental cause of this war, which was NATO expansion to the east. NATO posing a direct military threat to Russia. And that's why Russia launched the operation into Ukraine in February 2022. Then this has been over 35 years in the making. And Ukraine has effectively been a member of NATO, a de facto member of NATO, since 1995. The only difference is they don't get Article 5 protection. That means if they're attacked, all the other NATO countries have to come to their aid. And they don't have to pay a monthly, or yearly fee, 5% of their budget spending on NATO. But in terms of military exercises, there are now 31 NATO countries. But when I did the analysis, I only looked at 28 of them. Over this 32-year period, I asked the question, which countries have hosted the most NATO exercises? Ukraine was listed as number 6. So on this list of NATO countries, Ukraine, who's not a member of NATO, hosted more exercises than 21 of the other NATO countries in that 32-year period. So it's just like, let's recognize what's going on here. The intent of the West was to use Ukraine as a proxy to attack and destroy Russia. And Russia said, we're not having it. And they pushed back.
So when then does this become a war? Because Russia is obviously taking on damage as a result of what is going on. They have been for several years. The drone strikes on Russia have been increasing. Just like the Russians are firing a greater amount of drones against Ukraine, for some reason, Ukraine's drone production is ramping up to absurdly high levels, and they are starting to fire similar amounts. And apparently in the next couple of days, Russian Telegram channels are saying that they're expecting another major, probably one of the biggest drone attacks combination of Neptunes and Storm Shadow missiles. So at what point then does Russia have to change their approach to how they're prosecuting this conflict? Because if Trump has now encouraged NATO to up its military spend to 5%, you have Chancellor Merz saying that he is going to basically take on a war footing against Russia more overtly. At what point does Russia have to change its strategy? I mean, we've even seen an attempt on the nuclear triad recently.
Right.
And had that attack been more successful, they had to anticipate that the Russians would have done something more severe, even if one of these assassination attempts on Vladimir Putin had been successful. I mean, they must know that, or it does seem like they're trying to provoke the Russians into doing something. So my question to you, Larry, is when do you think the strategy changes? At what point does the line get crossed?
Well, it's the Russia's approach to this whole operation has evolved over time. When initially they took a significant amount of territory in the early days back in 2022, but the intent was to force Ukraine into negotiations, which in fact that it worked. That strategy worked until the United States and Boris Johnson intervened to tell Ukraine, you better not sign a deal. If Ukraine had accepted the deal that was on the table back then, they would still be in control of Donetsk and Luhansk right now, and Zaporizhia and Kherson. But they rejected it. And then Russia had to make an adjustment. They recognized, okay, we're now in a fight, and they had to start a mobilization effort, which in September of 2022. Then it evolved to the point where the West, Ukraine launched that their offensive in June of 2023, which was basically planned by the United States. The United States and Britain planned this thing, and the Ukrainians were supposed to execute it. But Russia created defensive lines. They were prepared for it, and they defeated it. And in defeating it, they destroyed really another army. So this was the second sort of major loss by the Ukrainians. And then Russia moved to upping its recruitment of its own citizens. And the Russian army has expanded now. It's like about 1.5 million soldiers. By way of comparison, the U.S. Army, 472,000. So Russia now has an armed force 3 times the size of what the United States does. It's probably combined, if you put the U.S. with Germany, France, England, Turkey, they might match what Russia has. But the difference is Russia's soldiers are combat trained. So Russia has been intensifying its offensive over the last 3 months. And as a result, the amount of territory that they're taking now in Ukraine is significant. And Ukraine is really on its heels. So, they may try to launch some additional drone strikes from Ukraine, but they don't change the situation on the ground. Situation on the ground is very simple. Ukraine does not have the trained manpower to sustain combat against Russian forces, and they're going to lose. I suspect it's it's very possible that this war would be over by the end of the year, simply because if you've been on a motorcycle and you're not sure how much gas you got in the tank, but once it gets low, the motorcycle runs and runs and runs until when it runs out of gas, all of a sudden it's boom. Mm-hmm. That's Ukraine.
Right.
Ukraine's running out of gas.
Yeah, I mean, it does appear that things must be in a crescendo in terms of the sheer volume of drone strikes. I mean, I can't imagine how many targets are left. I know that the Ukrainians have had some success in mitigating the attacks via electronic warfare, but eventually it seems like you say, they're going to exhaust their air defense capabilities. Mind you, I've heard this same thing for the last 3 years, that Ukraine is on the back foot and they're losing, and while the Russians have notably started to acquire more territory, that's quantitatively true. I think it's 500 square kilometers in the month of June versus, in previous months it was much less than that. I still wonder at what point then does NATO, the coalition of the willing, if you will, do you think they get involved in order to act as some kind of deterrent or tripwire? And what capacity? Like, okay, so this war ends in a year. Like, I can't just see NATO saying, okay, see you later.
What does NATO actually do? What are they capable of doing? Mm-hmm. This is, I don't know. Did you ever watch the Monty Python movie, The Holy Grail?
I recall some clips from it.
Okay. Yeah. So the one clip, I liken NATO to this one scene in the Monty Python movie where the knight, the camera with angry, it looks like he's riding a horse. And then when the camera, comes in on him, he's skipping along the ground, and behind him is a guy hitting coconut shells together to make the sounds of like horse hoofs. That's NATO. NATO is militarily impotent. It is, yeah, they've got, each country has some troops, but what can they do? They have no industrial base to produce what they need to stay in the fight. So, right now, just yesterday, Russia launched strikes, both with Iskander missiles and drones, into Nikolaev, and they hit a dormitory. Well, this dormitory was being used as a headquarters, not only for Ukrainian troops, but for British Special Boat Services, SBS, which is like SAS, except they swim. The Russians killed 50 Ukrainian military personnel and 20 SBS personnel. Now, SBS is a small unit, so that is a significant loss. There's really nothing NATO can do. NATO has thrown everything on the table up to this point. And if they declare war on Russia, what are they going to do? Invade Russia?
Could they not leverage air power to a greater extent?
No. Their air power is a joke. I mean, Russia has an air defense system that no other country in the world has, including China. And they came up with this in part because of George W. Bush, who walked away from the anti-ballistic missile treaty agreement in 2001. And the Russians said, Russians actually wanted to abide by that treaty. And Bush told them to, screw off. So next thing you know, Russia's building anti-ballistic missiles. And they have a very, very robust system. It's not perfect, but, United States doesn't have anything comparable to it. Nothing. And so if any of the Western air forces try to come into the country, they're going to be destroyed. So, Russia's built to defend itself, and the West is not.
So you think the Russians have an answer for the U.S.'s more advanced stealth technology?
I'm not sure the U.S. so-called advanced stealth technology is that great. If I'd encourage, any of your listeners, if they have a chance, to check out Andrei Martyanov. Andrei was a Russian born in the Soviet Union, but immigrated to the United States as a U.S. citizen. But he's written some terrific books. And his first book, Losing Military Supremacy, written 8 years ago now, you could say he was prophetic. But the fact of the matter is, and I've talked to some friends of mine who are U.S. Air Force officers involved with this entire issue, and they recognize the United States would get beat up pretty bad if we actually tried to use our quote stealth technology. Russia's ahead of the game of us on that.
So, with respect to what happened in Iran, you don't think that the Iranians were in possession of anything that approximated Russia's more advanced systems? No. In fact, they had turned it down. Russia had offered, they turned it down. There was an S-300 and S-400 system in Iran. Those were at the Bashir nuclear power facility, which is in southwest Iran, now down towards the Persian Gulf. And that was because there were 200 Russians at that plant working. And they warned both Israel and the United States, you better not attack us. And they didn't. That facility was left untouched. I guess I have a hard time believing that NATO is just going to walk away from this. What are the other asymmetrical options? Because we know, as you've stated, in terms of the machinations of the MI6 and, of course, the CIA, that they have capabilities that extend beyond, conventional means. So, Operation Spiderweb was a great example of that, in that they were willing to potentially crossed the threshold of triggering a major response from the Russians. Had that Operation Spiderweb been as successful as they wanted it to be, they were ready to go the distance, it appeared. So I'm very skeptical of the idea that they're just going to walk away from this. Like, I just can't see it happening.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with you. They're going to try to they will become more provocative as they go along. One of the let's call it the intelligence efforts underway is to use Azerbaijan as a wedge. They're trying to cultivate closer ties with Azerbaijan and to use it as a base for attacking Russia or for weakening Russia from the south. And look, the history going back over the last 35 years, the United States has funded, trained, and armed radical Islamists, the same people that we accuse of attacking us on 9/11. We funded and trained them, and they were involved in a war in Russia called the Second Chechen War that started in 1990, August 7th, 1999. And so, we will continue to try to do that kind of thing. The CIA station in Azerbaijan is pretty large. It's significant, I'm told. I don't have firsthand knowledge of it, but that's what I've been told by people who do know. So they will continue their efforts to try to attack Russia. But in terms of conventional military capability, NATO simply doesn't have it. Whatever they have would be, instantly destroyed by Russia. Russia has this new missile, this Oreshnik missile, that is hypersonic, but it's not a nuclear missile, but it carries a destructive capability that is pretty remarkable, and it can reach every single city, military facility in Europe, from England, Germany, France, and in a matter of minutes. So, Russia is prepared to escalate if it wants, but they've been pretty clear. They'd prefer to have a negotiated settlement. They'd prefer that NATO, get the hell out of its backyard, get away from Russia, and let's get on. Let's treat each other as neighbors, if you will, not being at war. But I think we're witnessing Europe is in the process of dying. They are facing extinction.
I was surprised by Dmitry Peskov's response today to some statements that were made by Trump with respect to Putin's bullshit, something to that effect, and some things that had come to light that he had said previously about had he been president at the time, he would have bombed Moscow.
And China and Beijing, too.
Right.
Yeah.
And so
He's
Peskov just kind
crazy.
of dismissed it as, this is like the Russians have a remarkable way of just remaining calm and stoic in the face of these types of provocations. But will this, it seems as though they've been able to kind of forestall a aggressive response from Trump up until this point. But does Trump get frustrated and do something?
But it gets back to the question, what does he do? Are we right now? The United States has deployed Aegis missile systems in Poland and Romania. That was done under Biden.
Right.
Those missiles.
Forgot about that. Yeah.
Those missiles are potentially capable of having a nuclear warhead put on them. So far, Russia has not responded to that, but that's one of the issues on their plate. The United States doesn't have, we can send in maybe another Patriot missile battery. So what? That doesn't do anything. That's like taking a bucket to the seashore and say, okay, I'm going to scoop the ocean out. Yeah, you're not going to do that with the bucket. the United States militarily is at a place where we no longer have the industrial capability to ramp up and begin producing weapons at a level that would replenish what we're using. And the contrast, I've used this statistic on several different podcasts, but it's noteworthy. Right now, to build an F-35 jet takes 18 months, 18 to 24 months. To build a B-2 bomber, again, about 18 months. That's today. We're not building brand new tanks. We are taking the M1 Abrams tanks that were initially built 40 years ago, and we're refurbishing those. How long does it take us to refurbish one of those tanks? 2 years. Okay, by contrast, in World War II, we built the B-24 Liberator bomber. That bomber was put together in 63 minutes. And it was completed and ready to fly within 18 hours. So we've gone from having an industrial system like that to what we have today. Now, remember, back then, and this is the difference between war and special military operation. In the 1940s, the United States stopped selling. You couldn't go out and buy a brand new car. You couldn't go out and buy brand new tires. You're getting ration cards for fuel and food because the entire nation was mobilized for the war. Because those factories that used to produce brand new cars, they were now producing tanks and armored personnel carriers and trucks for the military and building ships and building planes. United States doesn't have that anymore. We couldn't do that if we tried. Right now, we're producing roughly 500,000 artillery shells a year, 40,000 a month, roughly. Well, and you say that's a lot. That's a lot. Except, when you realize that Ukraine at one point was shooting off 5,000 rounds a day, do the math, So that's 300 and 5,000 times. That's 35,000 in a week. That's basically almost 150,000 a month. All of a sudden, the United States is producing enough artillery shells that we could last half a month at the rate of fire. And then on top of that, with the artillery barrels, the barrels of the guns, they get worn out with that much fire. And you realize that the Russians are firing 4 to 5 times the amount of shells that Ukraine is. And Russia is producing what it needs. So, I mean, it's just, the whole thing's out of balance. The West is in the business of deceiving itself about its capabilities.
Do you think, though, that is not taking its toll on the Russian economy? Because, I mean, obviously, artillery shells war is deflation or inflationary. And I often hear the argument that we're not currently at a level where we're producing that. But just like in World War II, couldn't they turn it on somehow and go into that war mobilization mode? Like, I suspect that if there was an event that was, that could trigger some sort of push towards rapid war industrialization, that could happen.
Yeah, number one, for producing a lot of those explosives, you need antimony, a rare earth mineral. Who produces antimony? China.
I think I just heard that the U.S. had imported a record amount of it recently.
I don't think so. China, because China's been holding back on it. They've used it effectively against the United States to keep them, to send them a message. But No, the U.S. We don't actually have the physical plants. You can build them, you can create them, but that takes time. And so far, we've not seen the United States actually undertake that kind of effort.
Okay, so if they're continuously escalating this then, and we're running out of conventional capabilities, at what point do they look at all those nuclear weapons on the shelf and say, maybe we can just use one?
Unlikely, unless they go completely insane and are suicidal. Russia has a defensive capability in place that they could defeat a number of U.S. ballistic missiles. United States has failed to create a hypersonic missile. All ballistic missiles travel at speeds that are considered hypersonic. But what makes a hypersonic missile unique is the fact that in its final stages, you can actually maneuver it.
Yeah.
United States doesn't have that. We don't have a weapon system. We've been trying to develop it. I know one of the people that's been directly, one of the project managers actually. And he was saying 3 years ago, oh, we're 6 months away. We've never gotten there. So the United States is at a disadvantage right off the bat. Just pray to God, we never get to that position, because the amount of death and devastation would be significant. The United States would come to an end. Canada would come to an end. Russia, I don't know. But you mentioned the economy, and I've heard a lot of Americans commenting that, oh yeah, Russia's economy is in trouble. No, it's not. The fact this year they announced, okay, we're taking measures to stop inflation, and so our growth is going to go from 4.4% down to 1.5%.
Yeah.
Well, again, having been to Russia and seen it, it's modern, it's beautiful, it's safe, it's clean. You don't see homeless people all over the streets.
Well, even in places like North Korea, I mean, there's not a lot of frivolous spending like you might find here in the West. And I guess, one could make the argument that it's true that Russia has less debt than the United States. They have an abundance of resources. They have a more homogenous cultural population.
That's not true. Are you
to the extent that
they got 160 different ethnic groups. I mean, they got 20 million Muslims.
Yeah, they do seem more aligned than the United States, though, like in terms of like the domestic disputes and the potential for unrest.
Well, the 20 million Muslims, for example, they're strong Russian nationalists. So this is what I think Russia has actually something to teach the world, that they are ethnically very diverse, and yet within that diversity, they found a way to bring those different ethnic groups together. That they are all they put, hey, we're Russians first, and which I find, it's a model that I wish the United States could emulate, because you don't find the kind of racial tension and diversity, racial tension and problems that we find here in the States, for example.
Yeah, with the U.S., I mean, they still have what I call the golden credit card, which is the ability to basically print money without much consequence, because they have the global reserve currency, which they could leverage even if it is in its final phases towards, rapid, war industrialization, in the sense that they have the fiat to buy stuff. Now, whether or not they can access the antimony and stuff like you're saying is, I suppose, a subject of debate. obviously, oil prices could potentially factor into this as well, with the Russians heavily reliant on oil, revenues. If the oil price remains as low as it is, and the sanctions increase, do you think that? I guess more specific question: do you think that this thing being proposed by Lindsey Graham with 500% tariffs on anybody who buys Russian oil, do you think that's going to pass?
Yeah, it doesn't matter that they can pass it. The U.S. is increasingly irrelevant on that front. Imagine, as a Canadian prepper, I take it you've taken steps that you could survive on your own for a while, correct?
Yeah, you could say so.
Okay. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
it's putting it mildly.
Yeah. But so imagine the Canadian government says, "Oh, we're going to come after you, and we're going to surround you. We're going to starve you out." Well, what they didn't count on was the fact, guys.
Yeah.
I got my own food. I got my own power source. I've set myself up so I can survive no matter what you do to me.
Mm-hmm.
That's Russia. That's what the West doesn't get. Mm-hmm. Russia is the only country in the world that is self-sufficient. They don't need a damn thing from anybody else. And price of oil goes down, price of oil goes down. You know what? It used to be that China was purchasing most of its food, its grain, corn, soybeans, from the United States. That's now changed over the last 2 years. They're now buying more of it from Russia because Russia produces a lot, has enormous capability on the food front. They're getting their oil from Russia. They're getting their natural gas from Russia. They don't need the West anymore. And now the United States is running around saying, God, we got to find people that will buy our crops because this demand has gone away. So Russia is in an extremely strong economic position.
So the 500% sanctions, I guess, would be imposed on China, I presume, if that was to go into effect. If it was even enforced, it's hard to say, but it seems like that would be highly disruptive. And is that when this becomes a true world war, in the sense that now the alignment between the Russians and the Chinese, and as we'll talk about in a moment, the Iranians, becomes almost existential? Is this how the war potentially spreads beyond Russia and Ukraine and opens up a new front in the Pacific?
Well, Russia and China both are trying to avoid the war with the United States. It's the United States that is the aggressor. Again, just let's say that you were from Mars and you just came down in a spaceship and landed. And you said, okay, hey, tell me what's been going on here the last, let's go back to 1980. For the last 45 years, what's been going on? What country in the world has been invading other countries? Well, you could say, well, the Soviet Union went into Afghanistan in 1979, again, a provocation by the West, where we were actively supporting radical Islamic groups and trying to weaken that government. That's what Russia reacted to. But other than that, the only country in the world that has been routinely invading other countries, killing people in other countries, is the United States. No other country. China, its last foreign military intervention, 1979 in Vietnam, because Vietnam was attacking Cambodia and China was siding with Cambodia, and China got its ass kicked. Yeah. Russia, apart from the going into Afghanistan in 1980, the reality is Russia reacted to Western provocations in Georgia in 2008, and that was a 2-week war. But other than that, Russia hasn't been going around the world. Look at the United States. Libya, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia, Panama. You know.
So along the lines of that rationale, then, if it is true that the United States is the chief aggressor in this, and I'm going to play the devil's advocate a little bit here with respect to, like, okay, it's true that the United States was the only country to ever utilize a nuclear weapon. We have been embroiled in these wars for years and years and decades. We're now funding a genocide in the Gaza Strip. I think most people, I think it's okay to say that now. It's well within the Overton window. And it is possible that all these things are true. They would perhaps make the argument that, well, you have these authoritarian societies like that they'll call the Chinese and the Russians, where there are restrictions in terms of if you can protest, people do fall out of windows. There's a mysterious, self-deletion that happens with officials who are dissident. And they would probably make the argument that, yeah, we're still ultimately the lesser of two evils. But if they're in that way of thinking, then to me, it doesn't seem like a stretch to suspect that if we are like broadcasting a genocide in 4K, and if they're pulling Ukrainian men from their women and children's clutches to send them to the front lines to die, it doesn't seem like too much of a stretch to think that they would pull some tactical nukes off the shelf, and if they had to, that they would do that in a heartbeat.
Well, there's always, that is in the realm of, it's possible. It could happen. I think it's highly unlikely. What concerns me more is sort of the propaganda that is prevalent in the West to portray pictures of both Russia, China, Iran as aggressors, as threats. Again, with Iran, we're talking about, oh, they chant death to America. Mm-hmm. What was John McCain's song? Bomb, bomb, Iran?
Yeah, Trump just retweeted that the other day.
Yeah. So, the United States is engaged in the same kind of nonsense as far as aggressive language towards others. But the difference is we've actually killed Iranians. They say, oh, Iran's trying to assassinate Donald Trump. Really? Who killed Soleimani? Oh, Donald Trump brags about that. So it's just, the hypocrisy on the part of the West is just staggering when it comes to this. Having been in Russia, and people say, oh, well, it was just a Potemkin village, made up, they're just showing you what they wanted to see. For God's sake, Moscow's 21 million people. Are you telling me that Vladimir Putin is so powerful that he can compel 21 million people to act in a certain way? Hey, Johnson's in town. Let's pretend that we're happy. I mean, come on. God, I've been, like I said, I've traveled. I've been around the world. I have been in most countries in Europe, several countries in Africa, a few countries in Asia. I've been, Thailand, Japan, and I've been into Iraq and Qatar and United Arab Emirates. So I do have some sense of whether you're getting played or not. Mm-hmm. And what I found in Russia was a society that's open, prosperous, the people, because they learned lessons from their time as communists in the socialist republic. They rejected that. They are now they are nationalists. They are religious. It's a Christian country predominantly, but even though they're Christian, they figured out a way that they coexist with other religious groups without persecuting them, without excluding them, without being prejudiced against them. And it's really something remarkable to see.
Yeah, I suppose the counter argument would be that they were a lot of the conscripts who are being mobilized are not from the Moscow region. Do you believe that that's true?
Oh yeah, no, people are signing up. They're signing. We got the video. You know, in this era of social media, Russia does not have control over social media that they prevent people from posting. What you see repeatedly in Ukraine are video after video of guys being tackled, dragged off the street,
right,
torn out, women, children crying. You know, you see it day after day. Never seen that in Russia, not once, not one example, because the guys are signing up. They're you know, in some cases, there's a financial bonus to sign up. Sure, that's going on, but Russia right now is recruiting at a rate of 50,000 a month, and Ukraine, they're barely able to get 20,000 a month.
Well, it appears as though, according to German Chancellor Merz, he's claiming that diplomacy has now been exhausted. And for this reason, Germany and other countries need to take a more active role. So it does appear as though they're setting the stage for some sort of NATO intervention, whatever that might be, even if it is going to be, you know, something which is going to fall short of what's required. It appears as though they're getting ready to do it. I guess the question is, why can't they just let Ukraine go? Like, why can't they just say, okay, you guys have everything to the east of the Dnieper River, and we'll call it even, we'll erect a new Berlin Wall of sorts. Why can't they just do that? Why are they so unwilling to just let this go?
Because Russia is a threat to the globalist agenda. The globalist agenda wants to erase national identity. The globalist agenda wants to promote transgenderism, homosexuality, death of religion. Those are all things that Russia stands against. And Russia, on top of it, is this enormously wealthy country in terms of natural resources. They can't have that. The West has to have it. It's our right. We're a bunch of colonial dictators. We've spent the last 500 years exploiting Africans, Asians, Latin Americans, stealing from them, killing them. Hey, we got accustomed to it. We're good at it, so we can't let go of it. That's the Merz mentality. You know, the Germans didn't learn a damn thing from May of 1945. The Russians beat them once, the Russians will beat them again if Merz is foolish enough to go this route. It's just, it's obscene, the characters like him. But why is Merz? Who did he work for? BlackRock. BlackRock has an enormous financial bet on the table in Ukraine, and they're losing it. Merz has got to try to, man, if he can save BlackRock. This is all about money, Nate.
I wasn't familiar with his connection with BlackRock. That's interesting.
Oh yeah, he was basically BlackRock's guy in Europe. So, you know.
You talked about Azerbaijan as the linchpin. I think this is the part that not a lot of people understand, because apparently Azerbaijani Airspace was utilized by the Israelis for Iran. Right. So it really does seem like it's a linchpin of sorts that really bridges the two theaters of war. Can you maybe just elaborate a bit on the relationship between it? Just explain for people in simple terms, like what's going on with that and how it relates to Iran and Russia and where that might be a unifying factor between the Russians and the Iranians.
Well, Azerbaijan used to be, was part of the Soviet Union. The current president, Aliyev, his father was a major KGB. I was a senior KGB officer. So, was closely tied into the Soviet Union. But Azerbaijan is a Shia Muslim country. You would think it would be naturally allied with Iran, but it is not. It actually has closer ties with Turkey. And so Turkey has been using it. And you've had this war between Christian Armenia and Muslim Azerbaijan that goes back centuries. The war in the area, disputed territory in Armenia called Nagorno-Karabakh, had been, active for good Lord, the last 40, 50 years. It appears that the West has made significant inroads, and Israel in particular, significant inroads in developing relations with Azerbaijan, to the point that Azerbaijan is becoming quite aggressive, not only towards Iran, but also towards Russia. And in fact, if we look back, remember President Raisi of Iran was in Azerbaijan, flying back from Azerbaijan when he died. I believe Azerbaijan, they sabotaged his aircraft. I believe that he was murdered. That was an assassination. So this is all of this is, again, the West cynically using Azerbaijan to try to open up, if you will, a second front, to distract Russia, to keep Russia from focusing only on Ukraine, to force Russia to divert resources to dealing with Azerbaijan. And Russia is quite capable of dealing with that. But, it's a very dangerous game, and the people of Azerbaijan will suffer as a consequence of it. It's, again, Western interference in these countries. We just can't, we in the United States can't keep our damn hands to ourselves. We're always meddling with somebody else, bothering somebody else. We don't bring peace to the world, we bring war.
So will this turmoil in Azerbaijan, do you expect it to be contained to Azerbaijan, or do you expect them to actually potentially start conducting either attacks into Russia, or will they just use it as a launch pad for further attacks into Iran? Like, I'm trying to understand what is the threat? Is it just that Russia's southern border will become more unstable and they'll have to fix?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. They're trying to destabilize. The West wants to destabilize the southern border throughout the Caucasus. That includes Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan. That's why Russia is actually paying close attention to Iran. There's some hints that Azerbaijan may try to invade northern Iran. I don't think that's likely, but again, that's one possible scenario. It is a volatile area, and it's an area where the West is hell bent on doing everything it can to weaken Russia, because the ultimate target in all this is China, right? Because China, the West is insisting that, quote, China's the threat. But what's happening with Russia and China and their leadership roles in BRICS is the creation of a new financial system that's not controlled or dominated by the West. That's what's at play here. And, I think that China and Russia will prevail in that. And that, the United States, let's call it the end of the United States financial empire. Yeah, that's on the horizon.
So recently it was discovered that apparently the Russians had offered the Iranians more support and the Iranians had declined that support. Is this due to a history of tension between the two countries? Is there distrust there? Is that distrust now going to subside as a result of this Azerbaijan situation? And I just learned a few minutes ago that apparently the Chinese have now already sent new missile defense systems to Iran, and that it appears as though Iran is opting for the Chinese air defense as opposed to the Russians. So how does the Azerbaijani situation factor into the relationship with Russia and Iran and China?
Have you ever been around a child where the child wants to do everything on its own and doesn't want any help? Leave
Every
me
day.
alone. I'll do.
Yeah.
That was Iran.
Okay.
Iran took pride and said, "Hey, we're going to defend ourselves. We don't need your help." Part of the deal with Russia, Russia and Iran signed a mutual security agreement, a comprehensive security agreement on January 17 of this year. Russia had offered, as part of that agreement, a full mutual defense pact. In other words, that if any attack on Iran would be viewed as an attack on Russia, and Russia would intervene militarily. Iran turned that down over religious reasons, that they didn't want to be, that from a religious standpoint and under Sunni Islam, they don't believe in preemptive attacks. So that they are against, they will wait to be hit until they respond. And so they didn't want to be committed into a relationship where Russia could undertake a preemptive attack as it did in Ukraine, and that then Iran would be obligated to respond. That was the reason.
Really? That's interesting. That seems crazy.
Well,
that you would expose yourself like that and put yourself at a disadvantage.
but that goes to the depth of the faith, the religious faith that they abide by. Now, since this attack by Israel and the United States, Iran's seeking assistance not just from China but from Russia as well. And the Russian Chinese are more than happy to help because they recognize this attack on Iran is all about destabilizing that region and bringing it under the control of the West so that they can go after Russia and China. So Russia and China finally realize, hey, they're trying to kill us. So we're gonna hang together. And I think the West is making a very, very fatal error in pursuing this course of action, because Russia and China understand what the threat is, and they've got the capability to respond to us. The United States, just look at the current situation. We don't, Ukraine was begging for 155 millimeter shells. We couldn't provide it. We don't have enough. We produce in 1 year, as I said earlier, what they shoot off in 2 weeks. So it's like, we are at the United States. We're continue to pretend that we're bigger, stronger, faster, smarter. We're now, we like that the United States is like a guy who's 75 years old, fat, overweight,
Life support.
looks like me, not a handsome person, but still thinks that they're 25 years old and a stud looking like you, okay? And say, yeah, man, lady's going to love me. And they don't realize how repulsive, how weak, how incapable they are. That's the situation we're in. The United States is convinced that it's the fairest of them all. We're the best. He listened to Trump. Our military unparalleled. Really? We're so great that we got our ass kicked by the Houthis? Well, I mean, let's be honest about it. Yeah, the Houthis capitulated. We're pulling our troops out. No such thing. The Houthis didn't capitulate. They drove the United States Navy out of the Red Sea.
And they're still attacking ships.
Yes.
Which is crazy. Okay, so does Israel then, knowing that the Iranians now have been bolstered with these new air defense systems, does Israel still continue with its campaign against Iran, or has that been shelved? What do you think Netanyahu and Trump are talking about this past 2 days with respect to that issue?
I got to be careful what I say here, because Israel will be idiotic, foolish, if they try to attack Iran again, as well as the United States, because this next go round, Iran has capabilities that they did not use during this last attack in response to the attack. Israel was on the verge of being destroyed. Iran had shut down the only two functioning ports in Israel, Ashdod and Haifa. They shut down the only two oil refineries in Haifa and Ashdod as well. They shut down the only international airport. They had attacked their equivalent of the Pentagon, the National Security Agency, the CIA headquarters. They had attacked the equivalent of Andrews Air Force Base. They had attacked and hit significant military installations throughout the country. It was Israel that went begging the United States, hey, we got to get us out of this. Let's get a ceasefire. Get them to stop. And Iran stopped. Foolishly, in my view. I think they should have pressed it on. They should have finished Israel off.
Don't you think that would have elicited a nuclear response from Israel?
It's possible. That was in the back of their minds that this would have triggered what's known as the Samson option. They pulled up short, but again, there should be no doubt who the real destabilizing evil force in the Middle East is. In my view, it's Israel. The Zionist mentality is so destructive. And it's they've got themselves into a position where God said this is our country and we can kill whoever we want. Sorry, if that's your God, I want no part of him.
You've talked about briefly about the eschatological motivations with respect to this end time stuff with Israel and Netanyahu. Do you believe that the leadership there actually believe that, or is that just a tool that they use to kind of manipulate the masses?
Some do. Some believe it. The Smotriches, the Ben Gvirs, they believe it. I'm not sure Netanyahu buys into that at all.
Yeah, he seems too pragmatic.
He's just, he's all about enriching himself and staying out of prison. But I think it is, in an age where we've got a lot of people that have turned away from religion, that have not been raised within Christian or Jewish faith in terms of a fundamentalist view. They don't have any appreciation of how these religious ideas affect these policy decisions that are underway. And when you got people like Mike Huckabee, who really believes that, hey, we got to have that battle of Armageddon. We got to have all the nations of the world come and attack Israel, and then God will come down. Jesus is going to return. They really believe that. And I don't know if it's fortunate or unfortunate, but at least 3 billion people in the world don't believe that. They have no idea what you're talking about. When you consider that, the vast Asian populations between India and China and everybody in between, they haven't been raised with that kind of Christian Judaic theology about the end of times. Yeah, there is some of that within the Muslim world. So, you can find Muslim eschatology as well, sort of dovetails, but everyone's got a different version. You got a Christian version, a Jewish version, and an Islamic version of how the world ends. I'm not sure, I'm not familiar enough with Hinduism or Buddhism to know if those particular religions suggest have an end of the world scenario built in. But unfortunately, there are some elements both in the Israeli government and I'd say in the U.S. government that see it a good thing that the more that we can provoke a war in the Middle East, it's going to prepare the way for Jesus to come back.
You and Scott Ritter, who are, you guys are obviously on good terms, but you do have a slight disagreement with respect to how it would possibly play out, I think, in the Middle East, in the sense that Scott seems to be of the persuasion that if Iran were to fully fight back or pursue nuclear weapons, that they would be obliterated and that the United States and Israel would bring every nuclear capability to bear against them. I think you perhaps have a more optimistic outlook with respect to Iranian, the Chinese Eastern Axis capabilities in that respect. Is that safe to?
Yeah. No, I disagree with Scott on that. And, I've learned how to, you can disagree without being disagreeable, and not making it personal. But Israel, I've tried to play out in my mind the scenario that, okay, let's say Israel uses a nuke. They don't have the ability to destroy all of Iran. And then, because Iran is 91 times the size of Israel, number one, okay?
Yeah.
So, yeah, they could kill, they hit Tehran, they could kill, millions of people right there. Yeah, it'd be horrific. But then what does China and Russia do? And what does North Korea do? They've got nukes. And the notion that the United States could do anything without having to worry about a retaliation or repercussions is just nonsensical. I could see a scenario in which if the United States dared to use that kind of force against Iran, North Korea would hit us in a heartbeat. And there's not a thing we could do to stop it.
Where do you think they would like utilizing a EMP or actually sending a nuke into a United States city?
Oh, North Korea send a nuke into a U.S. city in a heartbeat.
You think they would do that over Iran?
Sure. Yeah,
Do you think that the ties are that strong? Eh?
Well, it's not so much the ties; it's the principle. Because North Korea understands that if the United States is allowed to nuke whoever it wants with no repercussions, they're next. They're next.
Yeah. It seems like that a lot of people suspect that is going to be a red line, but it's nowadays you just never know, I suppose. I just have one final question for you with respect to being a former CIA analyst. Do you ever get concerned for your own I'm just trying to, because I've interviewed Andrew Bustamante, I've interviewed Peter Pry, late Peter Vincent Pry, who was a former CIA. Ray McGovern was just on the show last week. Do you guys ever, is there some unwritten rule about what you can and can't talk about, or do you still have to be careful with how you have these conversations?
Yeah, well, there are. Number one, we signed a non-disclosure agreement when we went in, and so there are certain capabilities, collection activities that I won't talk about or discuss.
Yeah.
But I can talk about process. I can't talk about bureaucracy and how just because you join an organization where you're obligated to protect information doesn't mean that human nature has suddenly changed and that humans behave in a completely different fashion. They don't. It's like I held a G clearance or Gamma. Well, I know what that means, and to divulge what that means, that would be a violation. So I don't do that. I was read into a variety of what they call special access programs, SAPs. Again, I don't talk about that, but I can talk about how political pressure was brought to bear on us. I can talk about how intelligence was either misused or intelligence was ignored. And so, there's a balance. You find a way. You don't. If somebody was a non-official cover officer for the CIA, I'm not at liberty to go out and give up their name.
It seems like it would be a challenging situation to navigate, because you want to, kind of educate people about these things, but also having to be careful with respect to, which avenues you go down.
Yeah, I try to explain that, let me give you an example of explaining the process. So, recently when Tulsi Gabbard was giving the intelligence community view about does Iran, are they building a nuclear weapon? Well, you got to understand, she wasn't giving that as her opinion. And it wasn't like she called up 2 or 3 analysts and said, hey, what do you think? Oh, okay, I'll write that. No, this was a consensus judgment with the language written out, just like, if you will, a contract or a treaty, representing 5 agencies. The Central Intelligence Agency, because they had human intelligence. The Defense Intelligence Agency, they also had human intelligence. The National Security Agency, because they had signal intercept. The National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, NGA, they had the overhead photography and such. And then State Department, Bureau of Intelligence and Research. Normally those are the 5, they talk about 17, 18 intelligence agencies. Those are the 5 core agencies right there. Everybody else is like a consumer. Maybe you could add in the FBI, except FBI, they collect evidence, not intelligence. They're in a whole different world. So anyway, those 5 had to agree. And believe me, getting five different agencies with 5 different perspectives to agree on something, not easy. So when they were presenting that judgment, it was based upon solid intelligence. Now, it didn't mean that if you would have asked the question, is Iran capable of building a nuclear weapon if they have enriched uranium at the appropriate level? Absolutely. But the point was, they have not decided to build one because of religious reasons. Mm-hmm. So helping people understand what that process is, then you can appreciate how just stupid Donald Trump was to dismiss that. I don't know, that's just words on paper. No, it's not. It is actually a judgment based upon actual facts in terms of what they know, what they didn't know. And, I guarantee you one of the things that was behind that was whether it was the CIA or Mossad or the French or the Germans or multiple intelligence agencies had penetrated IAEA inspectors. They had inside information. They had access to information. That's why I believe that Israel knew where the names and addresses of those Iranian scientists who were killed. They got that out of the IAEA. I'd bet $1 million on that.
So the Tulsi Gabbard, she kind of did not really a 180, but she came out right before the stealth bomber attack and said that it felt as though that it was forced. Like she did
a 180. Come on, dude.
Right. Yeah,
she did a 180.
But do you think she was doing that? Who was pressuring her to do that, I guess?
Well, she what's the definition of a prostitute? Somebody that, will engage in relations for money. She's a political prostitute. Yeah. I've lost all respect for Tulsi Gabbard. She's a disgrace. She wants to hang on to the job and the position more than do the right thing. Shame on her.
I've long since suspected as much, but I'm trying to be as diplomatic as possible.
You're a gentleman. You're a gentleman.
Well, at least right now, yeah. I've been a bit more outspoken about it in the past. But so I guess maybe in closing, the intelligence agencies appear to have a lot of agency, no pun intended, with this thing, and it appears as though it's not entirely in Trump's hands. Like there's another force that is driving these conflicts, and some people call it the deep state.
Yeah.
But I guess we're we're going to have to just wait and see what they have in store.
Well, we've seen that specifically with the whole Jeffrey Epstein fiasco this week. The intelligence communities, both CIA and Mossad, shut that down. Nothing to see here. Move along.
Right.
It
was very abrupt too. It was like, that's it.
Yeah. It is. It's again, Trump said, he's at the mercy of the deep state, and frankly, I think he's slipped a lot. He's always been a narcissist, but he did have a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein in the past, and I think this he's now been fully exposed as compromised.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see whether or not his base holds him to account as we descend deeper into the abyss with this foreign policy stuff.
I know I'm holding him to account. He's dead. He's dead to me.
I unfortunately, because the preparedness community is there's a strong mega presence. I've unfortunately lost a lot of subscribers because I've been critical since the start. I've suspected that not much will change in terms of foreign policy, and here we are. We have an intensified war with Russia. We've already had, stealth bombers over Iran. I mean, and we're only, 6 or 7 months in. Yeah. So I suspect that there's a long, long way to go.
Yeah, it's 6 months in, and I'm very troubled by what I'm seeing with Trump. His tariff policies is just another example. I've got a neighbor 3 doors down from me. He owns a business. He imports, or he actually manufactures sports equipment, hockey sticks, baseball bats, lacrosse sticks, and they're all manufactured in China. And he's a Trump supporter. Trump signs in his yard. But he said, I'm having to come up with $150,000 tariffs on this shipment that's coming in. He said, we didn't budget for it. We don't have that money.
Yeah.
And so he's going to have to raise prices. It's like $25 increase on a baseball bat. So, Trump he's screwing his base with this kind of stupidity. And then he goes out and bragging about it. Oh, yeah, it hasn't caused inflation. Not yet, buddy, but it's going to.
Yeah, eventually. That's definitely going to work its way into that. Hey, Larry, where can people find more information about you? And is there any other place? I know you do frequent podcasts with the judge, Napolitano, and Nima over at Dialogue Works. Where can people find more information about you?
I'm at sonar21.com, SONAR 21.com. Stands for Son of the New American Revolution, 21st Century.
Cool.
Because I have 28 ancestors that fought in the American Revolution.
Yeah.
And, I think I come out of their genetic stock. I don't like bullies. I don't like tyrants. I don't like authoritarians. I don't deal with authority well. I like freedom.
Yeah, a friend of mine had notified me of that before this conversation. He's like, you should ask him about his ancestry at the American Revolution. And we got to talking about other things, but maybe next time for sure.
Sure.
All right. Well, thanks a lot for coming on. I appreciate it.
Hey, Nate, I appreciate the invite, and thank you so much.
The best way to support this channel is to support yourself by gearing up at CanadianPreparedness.com, where you'll find high-quality survival gear at the best prices, no junk, and no gimmicks. Use discount code PREPPINGGEAR for 10% off. Don't forget, the strong survive, but the prepared thrive. Stay safe.